Garrett traced the scar on his knuckle, a faint white line from a boyhood pact made with his older brother, the captain of the Ridgedale Raiders. His brother was supposed to come home a hero, trophy held high. Instead, he and the entire team vanished into a rainstorm in the winter of '82. For 26 years, the town spoke of the mystery in hushed tones, a ghost story about a bus that drove off the face of the earth. Then, a call from the sheriff's office about something found glinting in the cracked mud of the old reservoir bed threatens to shatter the decades of silence. It's strange how a single discovery can pull a forgotten tragedy back into the light. We'd love to hear if a similar event has ever shaken your own community, so be sure to share your story in the comments after you've heard this one. The phone felt unnaturally heavy in Garrett's hand, the receiver slick with grease from the garage. He stared out the open bay door of his auto shop, watching heat shimmer off the asphalt. For 26 years, that December night was a sealed room in his mind, the door locked and the key thrown away. Now Sheriff Brody was on the other end of the line, his voice calm and professional, using words like historic drought and uncovered artifact. But Garrett heard only one thing, a key turning in that long-shut lock. He wiped his hands on a rag, the scent of oil and gasoline, a familiar comfort that suddenly felt flimsy. He told his assistant he was leaving for the day, his voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to his own ears. The drive to the Blackwood Reservoir was a journey through a ghost land. Fields that should have been green were brittle and brown. The town's welcome sign, usually flanked by a rushing creek, now stood over a trench of dry, cracked stones. When he arrived, the scene was surreal. The vast reservoir where he and his brother Declan had learned to fish was gone. In its place was an enormous sun-baked basin of cracked earth, stretching for miles. It looked like the surface of a dead planet. A few police cruisers were parked near a makeshift command post, yellow tape fluttering in the hot, dry wind. Sheriff Brody, a man 10 years younger than Garrett but with the weary eyes of someone much older, met him at the tape line. He didn't offer a handshake, just a solemn nod. "Thanks for coming out, Garrett. I'm sorry to drag you into this, but we needed a positive ID." He led Garrett over the uneven, cracked ground. Every step kicked up a puff of fine, pale dust that smelled of decay and lakebed rot. A small group of deputies stood around an object on the ground. As Garrett got closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was unmistakably the base of a trophy. Made of a dark, heavy metal, it was corroded and caked with dried mud, but the small brass plaque was still attached, miraculously preserved. A deputy had gently wiped it clean. Garrett knelt, his knees cracking in protest. He didn't need to read the words, he had them memorized. Ridgedale High School Raiders, 1982 state basketball champions. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the cold, pitted metal. "It's theirs," he whispered, his voice raspy. "It's Declan's trophy." Sheriff Brody crouched beside him. "A couple of kids on dirt bikes found it an hour ago. They were riding where the shoreline used to be. It was just sitting there, plain as day." Garrett looked up, scanning the vast, empty basin. For 26 years, the official story was that the team bus had likely skidded off Highway 7 during the blizzard and fallen into a ravine somewhere in the dense national forest. Search parties had combed those woods for months, finding nothing. Not a shred of metal, not a piece of a uniform, not a single sign of the 12 boys, the driver, and their coach. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Garrett asked, looking at the sheriff. Brody's expression was grim. It means for 26 years, everyone was looking in the wrong place. That night, sleep was impossible. Garrett sat in his small living room, a bottle of beer sweating onto the coaster beside him, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. He pulled out an old, worn photo album. There was Declan, tall and grinning, his arms slung around a 12-year-old Garrett. On the next page was the team photo, taken in the locker room right after the championship win. 12 boys, their faces flushed with victory, hoisting the silver trophy. Garrett stared at his brother's face, trying to remember the sound of his laugh. All he could summon was the silence that came after. The discovery of the trophy base had done more than just reopen a cold case. It had ripped the scar tissue off a wound that had never truly healed. It gave him a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since he was a teenager. A dangerous, fragile hope. Not for survivors, he wasn't a fool, but for answers. For the first time in over 2 decades, he had a clear goal. He wouldn't just watch from the sidelines, he would be there, at that dry lake bed, until he could bring his brother home. The next morning, Garrett was back at the reservoir before the sun had fully risen. Sheriff Brody had expanded the search area, and a grid of orange flags now dotted the cracked earth. A team of volunteers, mostly middle-aged men, who had grown up with the missing players, worked alongside the deputies, their faces set with grim determination. Garrett joined them, his eyes scanning the ground, looking for anything out of place. The work was slow and heartbreaking. They found mundane debris first, old fishing lures, sunken bottles, the rusted frame of a lawn chair. But then, a volunteer about 50 yards from where the trophy base was found let out a shout. Buried in the silt was a single, mud-caked sneaker, a high top from the early 80s. A few hours later, another discovery, a tattered piece of red fabric with the letter R still visible. Each find was a punch to the gut, a tangible piece of a long-lost tragedy. Garrett worked relentlessly, fueled by coffee and a burning need to know. He spoke with the other families who had gathered at the edge of the search area. He saw the same mix of pain and renewed hope in their eyes. Some, like him, had never left Ridgedale, living their lives in the shadow of the disappearance. Others had moved away but had driven back as soon as the news broke. They shared stories, their voices soft, recalling the boys they had lost. It was a community of grief, reconvened after 26 years. Days turned into a week. The search grid expanded further into the basin. The media had descended on the town, their news vans parked along the service road, but Sheriff Brody kept them at a distance. This was a town's private pain, and he was determined to protect it. Then, on the 8th day of the search, a sonar team scanning the deepest part of the old river channel got a massive hit. It was a large metallic object buried under at least 10 feet of compacted silt and mud. An excavation team was called in. The work was painstaking. They used high-pressure water hoses to slowly wash away the layers of earth. Garrett stood with the other families on a nearby ridge, watching for 2 days as the crew worked. Finally, a piece of yellow metal emerged from the mud. Then another. It was the roof of a school bus. A collective gasp went through the crowd of onlookers. After all these years, they had found it. The bus was mangled, crushed by the pressure of the water and decades of settled earth. It took another full day to fully unearth the wreckage. It was lying on its side, the window shattered, the frame twisted. It was a tomb. Garrett felt a profound sense of dread and finality. The hope for answers was now paired with the certainty of loss. But as the initial shock wore off, a new, troubling question began to form in his mind, and he could see it on Sheriff Brody's face as well. They were standing nearly 5 miles from Highway 7. The bus was found in the old bed of the Cinder River, which fed the reservoir, and looming over the site, skeletal and broken, were the remains of an old wooden bridge, a bridge that had been part of a decommissioned logging road, closed to the public since the 1960s. The official theory was a lie. The bus hadn't skidded off the main highway. It had been somewhere it had no reason to be. The mystery hadn't been solved. It had just gotten deeper. Garrett couldn't shake the image of the collapsed bridge. Why had the bus driver, a cautious man named Al Patterson, taken a road that was known to be unsafe, a road that led to nowhere? He spent hours at the town library, poring over old maps and newspaper archives from 1982. He read about the blizzard that hit that night, one of the worst in the state's history. Highway 7 had been reduced to a crawl, with reports of cars being stranded for hours. The detail sharpened the question. If the main highway was slow, a shortcut might seem tempting. But that particular shortcut was suicide. The Cinder River was prone to flash floods, and that old bridge was infamous among locals as a death trap. Al Patterson, who had driven that route for 20 years, would have known that better than anyone. The investigation officially pivoted. It was no longer a missing persons case. It was a death investigation with deeply troubling questions. Sheriff Brody confirmed that the remains of all 14 passengers were found inside the bus. The town mourned, but for Garrett, the grief was mixed with a burning need for the final piece of the puzzle. He needed to know why. There was only one person left who might have an answer. a man who had been a local hero before becoming a recluse. The team's coach, Corbin Shaw. According to the official report, Coach Shaw had not been on the bus. He'd ridden with his wife to the championship game in their own car and had supposedly left before the team, wanting to beat the storm. But Garrett remembered something different. He remembered Declan telling him that the coach always rode the bus back with his team after a big win. It was his rule. Win as a team, lose as a team, travel as a team. Garrett found Coach Shaw's address in an old phone book. He lived on the edge of town in a small house that looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint since the 80s. The yard was overgrown, the windows dark. Garrett knocked on the door, his heart pounding. For a long moment, there was no answer. He was about to turn away when the door creaked open a few inches. A man with a deeply lined face, wild gray hair, and pale, haunted eyes peered out. He looked far older than his 60-odd years. "Coach Shaw?" Garrett asked. The man's eyes narrowed. "Do I know you?" "I'm Garrett Cole, Declan's younger brother." Recognition, followed by a wave of pain, washed over the coach's face. He tried to shut the door, but Garrett put his hand on it. "Please, Coach, I just have one question. Why was the bus on Old Mill Road?" The coach flinched as if struck. He stared at Garrett, his breathing shallow. For a moment, Garrett thought the old man would collapse. Then, with a shuddering sigh, Corbin Shaw sagged against the doorframe and whispered, "Because of me. It was all because of me." He opened the door wider and let Garrett inside. The house was a shrine. Every wall was covered with photos of the 1982 Raiders. Team pictures, candid shots of boys laughing, framed newspaper clippings celebrating their victory. In the center of the living room, on a small, dust-covered table, sat a lone basketball, faded and cracked with age. It was the game ball from that final championship. The coach sank into a worn armchair. Garrett remained standing, waiting. "They were good boys," the coach began, his voice a hoarse whisper. "The best team I ever had. We won. I've never been so proud." He described the celebration in the locker room after the game, the pure joy on the boys' faces. Then he spoke of the ride home. The mood was electric, the boys singing and shouting. But outside, the snow was coming down harder, turning into a blizzard. The radio said Highway 7 was a parking lot, the coach explained, his eyes fixed on some distant memory. Accidents everywhere. They said it could be hours. The boys, they just wanted to get home. They wanted to parade that trophy through town. He paused, swallowing hard. They were looking to me. I was their coach. I was supposed to make the right call. His face crumpled. I wanted to be the hero who got them home. I knew the old logging road. I had driven it hunting. I thought I could get us through before the river rose. He made the call. He told Al Patterson to take the turnoff onto Old Mill Road. The bus driver had protested, saying it was too risky, but the coach had insisted. The boys had cheered. They trusted him. The bridge, it looked fine, he said, his voice breaking. But the river was a monster. It was a flash flood. The water was already over the road. We got to the middle of the bridge, and I heard a crack like a gunshot. Then the whole world just fell. He described the horrific chaos of the bus plunging into the icy, churning water. The structure twisted, water pouring in, the screams of the boys silenced almost instantly. I was near the front, he choked out, tears streaming down his face. The windshield shattered. The current ripped me out of the bus. I don't know how. It was a miracle. A cruel one. He washed up on the bank a mile downstream, battered and hypothermic, the only survivor. He stumbled through the woods for hours until he hit a road, but when he saw the headlights of a passing car, he didn't flag it down. He hid. I couldn't face them, he sobbed. I couldn't tell them what I did. I killed those boys. My boys. I killed them all just to save a couple of hours. He made his way back to his own car, which he left at a diner near the highway entrance, and drove home, telling his wife and the police that he had left before the team. He let the whole world believe a lie while he withered away inside his house, a prisoner of his own guilt. As the coach finished his story, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the silence. Sheriff Brody stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. Garrett had called him on the way over, telling him his theory. "Corbin," the sheriff said, his voice gentle but firm, "we need you to come down to the station." Coach Shaw didn't resist. He stood up slowly, a man finally unburdened by a secret that had crushed him for a quarter of a century. As he was led out, he looked at Garrett, his eyes pleading. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I am so sorry." In the weeks that followed, the town of Ridgedale finally laid its sons to rest. A single large funeral was held at the high school gymnasium, the coffins of the 12 boys and their driver arranged in a line on the basketball court where they had once been heroes. The entire town came to pay their respects. Corbin Shaw was charged with 14 counts of involuntary manslaughter and received a sentence fitting for his age and broken health. For Garrett, there was no joy in the resolution, only a quiet, profound sadness. He had his answers, but they couldn't bring his brother back. After the service, the school gave the recovered trophy base to Garrett. He cleaned it carefully, the corroded metal now shining under the light. He placed it on his mantelpiece next to the photo of a tall, grinning boy with his arm around his younger brother. It wasn't a symbol of a championship anymore. It was a testament to a long-lost team, a town's enduring grief, and a truth that, like the bus itself, had finally been brought up from the dark. Garrett could finally look at his brother's picture and remember the life he lived, not just the mystery he left behind. The silence in his heart, which had lasted for 26 years, was finally filled with peace. The weight of a secret can be as devastating as the tragedy itself. Do you believe Coach Shaw's 26 years of silent suffering was a form of justice, or should he have faced the consequences immediately, no matter how painful? We appreciate you spending your time with us today. If this story moved you, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you don't miss our next journey into the mysteries that lie hidden just beneath the surface.